Bible schools, etc., in the local schools. So you can pray for her and the language work that she is doing. And then Bob Wright, again, he's our missionary deacon, and he kind of can do everything, anything. And so some of the programs that he's in charge of are, number one, he's in charge of construction. So when he was here in the United States, he owned his own construction company. So he's got lots and lots of skills in terms of building and welding and things like that. And so, first of all, he's in charge of building our new clinic. So the old clinic is over on that side. We live over on that side. The new clinic is right in the middle, looking up into the big mountain. And so he can work with some of the Karamojong men and teach them many of these skills. So whether it's laying concrete slabs like this one, digging the foundations, doing the welding, etc., he can teach a lot of these skills to some of the Karamojong men. And so you can be praying for Bob as he's interacting with these men on a day-to-day basis. Not only in terms of the construction, but agricultural programs, etc., that he, as a missionary deacon, would also adorn the work of the gospel. So in his interactions with the people, in his day-to-day work, the diaconal work would also adorn the work of the gospel. So he, again, can teach them how to lay the concrete slabs. He can teach them how to do the stonework for the walls of the clinic, as well as the welding. And so our new clinic is being built out of locally available stone, as well as cement and metal. And so the goal is that our new clinic is going to be termite proof, so we don't get eaten out of our clinic. Next. We can buy the metal from down in Mbali or Kampala, bring it up. Bob has his own workshop there on the living compound. And so all the windows and doors can be welded there locally. And again, he can be teaching some of those skills to the people there in the area. So this is what our clinic looked like back in March when Jenny and I left. So it's going to be 3 buildings. The front building is going to have 4 offices for seeing patients, as well as a lab. The second building is going to have the pharmacy as well as a storage area. And then the third building, which is going to be behind these 2 buildings, is going to have a procedure space as well as an office area. So the goal is to lay a concrete slab here in the front, and that's going to be the waiting or reception area, and then to have a tin roof that goes over the entire structure. So Lord willing, in the next year or so, the new clinic will be finished and we'll be working in the new clinic. This is just a random insect at school. Go ahead. Bob is also in charge of drilling wells. So this is kind of one of his hobbies, one of his favorite things to do. He's developed a drill that he has on a trailer on the back of his truck. And he can go around into some of the surrounding villages or even on our local compounds and drill for clean water. And so again, it's a great opportunity to be out in the villages, interacting with people. Everybody likes to come and watch him as he's doing the drilling. And then the pastors or one of the visitors can do some teaching Bible stories while he's doing that work. Because he has his own drill, then he's drilled the wells for our living compound as well as for the clinic. And so because we have our own protected water sources, we actually do not have to filter or boil the water that we use, which is really nice for us. He is also in charge of the agricultural program. And so we've got what's called a Work for Food program, where we can hire lots of the villagers from around. They can come and help with whatever crop we're growing that year. So they can come and do the digging, the planting, the weeding, the harvesting of whatever crop we have that year. So this picture is of hibiscus. This is a cash crop that we started growing. It is used to make teas and juices. The product is sold. The money from that sale is then used to continue this Work for Food program. And then the people who work for us are paid using whatever grain or food product that we have available at that time. So again, that's the Work for Food program. So we've got 4 missionary families, but we've also got several missionary associates. So missionary associates are people who come over anywhere from like 6 months to several years. And they do all sorts of things to help us on the mission. They might come to do construction or agricultural work. They might be there as teachers for the missionary kids. They might do medical work with us in the clinic. Or, for example, this is Leah Hop. Leah is the younger sister of Ben Hop, our missionary down in Haiti. Leah's been there for going on 3 years, and she is doing public health. So she'll go out into the villages, she'll come into the clinic and teach many different things, whether it's basic sanitation or maternity care or diet, etc. She has great opportunity to do a lot of teaching for public health among the villagers. We've also got people who are there regularly as teachers for the missionary kids. So right now we've got 2 teachers. this is Emily Peel from New York and Erica Voltais from down in Southern California. And again, they're there as missionary teachers for the missionary kids. So the Wrights, the Trucaricos, and the Ockins, they help with their kids, as well as several other language and other programs in the mission. And then finally, in addition to Heather Foss, who's there as the nurse, we also have Chris and Chloe Burdick. They are there. Chris is there to help Bob doing construction and agriculture, and then Chloe is there doing administrative work for the mission. So we've got 5 individuals there as missionary associates. So this is a picture of the acacia tree, or the thorn trees that we've got there in Karamoja. And so these thorns can literally be like 2 to 3 inches long, and so you can see why they're used to make those fences that go all the way around their villages. You can also see why it's not a great idea to walk around in bare feet in Karamoja. We've mentioned several prayer requests as we've gone along, but the most important prayer request would be to pray about the spread of the gospel. Pray that the gospel would go forth there in Nakale. So Nakale Presbyterian Church is still a mission work, which means we do not have local leaders at this time. And so please pray that God's word would go forth in Karamoja, but please also pray that God would raise up leaders, pastors, and elders for the church there in Nakale. So I'm going to mention 2 men in particular. This is locally David. This is locally Paul. These are 2 Karamojong men who have been with the mission for many years doing translation work with the pastors. But they also do a lot of teaching. They like to go out and do Bible stories in the villages. And so it's been really great to see their excitement and how much they love going out and doing this teaching. Even when the pastors aren't available, they still want to go out and do some of the teaching. So again, please pray that the gospel would go forth. Pray that God would work in David and Paul's lives to raise them up as pastors or elders in the church, and that God would raise up other leaders for the church there in Karamoja. This is what our church building looks like there in Nakale. So it's got a tin roof on the top. It's got a cement slab on the bottom, and then it's an open-air church building. So we don't have any walls, which means the cows and the goats get to come to church as well. So we already mentioned language learning. Please pray for Jenny and myself as we try and learn the language, but also pray for the entire mission. And then finally, one closing point before I do a little demonstration, and that is that hands washed with soap and water are hands to be proud of. So I want everybody to remember that tonight, please. And then if I could get the lights back on, I am going... Oh, I have one more critter. These are a type of cow that lives in southern Uganda, and they just have the coolest horns ever. So. Okay, so quick demonstration. I'm going to get rid of this. Okay, so I mentioned that all the men and boys in Karamoja wear a sheet or a blanket like this. And so how do you wear something like this? The normal way is to wear it like this. And so you can see why we're thankful for shipments of other clothes, because there's no pin or anything to hold it on. So if you move around too much, it doesn't always stay on. It does get cold in Karamoja. It gets down to about 60 degrees. And so you've got to have the cold weather version. And the hooded sweatshirt version is worn like this. So that way you've got your hood. Then there's another new style, again, that has hit Karamoja. And that is for these young men. And so I mentioned how most of the guys in Karamoja, they sit around most of the time doing nothing. They talk. But nowadays you actually have some of these young men, in addition to doing crocheting, they are out working in the gardens. And so you can see why if you have this blanket on up over your shoulder and you're out doing some physical work, it's just going to fall off. So it's not very practical. So the new style for the young men of Karamoja is to wear the mini skirt. They don't wear a shirt. They wear their Dr. Seuss hat, and they all have a cell phone. And that's what Karamoja men. They're very resourceful people. They're good at repairing things, making things. So if they do wear shoes, most of the Karamojong will have tire shoes. So they make them out of old tires so that the thorns can't penetrate the bottom of their shoes. The men get a little stool like this. So the women and children, they have to sit on the ground, but the men get a little stool. So they might use it as a pillow, but usually it's for when they're sitting around talking for the 7 or 8 hours a day. This is the way they'll sit for literally 7 or 8 hours a day. So, if anybody wants to try out the little stool when we're finished, this is the real size, but we don't accept responsibility if you can't get back up again. And then finally, just a little bit about the language. So the Karamojong language was an unwritten language. So there's basically maybe 5 or 10 books actually printed in the Karamojong language. It was the Catholics who have been in the area for the longest period of time, maybe about 60 years or more, who have done most of the work in terms of the translation. And so because it was an unwritten language, they wrote it down phonetically. So it was a group of Italian Catholics, most of them, who did the work, and they did it phonetically. So whatever they heard, they just sounded it out using the traditional Roman alphabet. So for anyone who can read English, it's the same alphabet that we use, except that they do not use X's, Z's, and Q's, and they have one extra phonetic symbol, and that's the letter N with the J tail. And that's the sound So if you think of the word song, that NG at the end is a really common sound in the Karamojong language. So we live in Karamoja, we're working among the we're living among the Karamojong people, and we're trying to learn the Karamojong language. So last year, March of 2011, was when the entire Bible was released in the Karamojong language. So we're very thankful to have this as we do the work there in Karamoja. Questions? Yes?
Seeing as cows are so important, do you actually have any?
So the mission has a policy of not having any cows. So they are very important, but because of that, we do not want to be raided. And so the mission does not keep any animals except for chickens. Yes, sir?
Do you have any security problems on your pharmacy and your clinic?
Do we have security problems? So, yes and no. So, the Karamojong culture is one of common property. So, you just share everything, basically. And so, for them, if you leave something sitting out, like if we have a water bottle or whatever, and I set it down, and then I walk away from it, well, it's just there. And so, that's my fault for leaving it. And if somebody wants to take it home, they don't consider that to be stealing. And so we have to be very careful in terms of our own living compound, but also the clinic, just basically to prevent temptation. We do keep things as well locked up as we can to prevent that from being a problem. So basically in the clinic, we don't have much of a problem because we do keep it locked up. I mean, I'm sure some things get stolen, but it's not a major problem.
What about, because I work in the medical industry, what about refrigeration? How do you manage to keep things that have to be kept cold?
So we actually do have refrigeration, and it's done by propane. So in the clinic we've got a refrigerator, and then each of the missionary families has a propane refrigerator, a propane stove, and then we have solar-powered electricity. So as long as you remember to change the propane tank every month, you're doing really well. Yes?
What do you have for bedding?
What do we have for bedding?
So we live a pretty comfortable lifestyle, so we have regular beds, but the Karamojong people would sleep on like a cow skin or some other kind of skin and then use those blankets to cover up. So.
Yes?
The villages steal cows from one another. Are they the same villages that share the water?
They would tell us no. They would tell us it's the enemy, the Bokots, who come from Kenya to come and raid them. But the likelihood of them raiding other Karamojong is pretty high, but I have no idea whether they actually do. They swear they don't raid other Karamojong, so probably not someone who shares the same water source, probably somebody a little bit farther away than that.
Yes?
You mentioned about malnutrition being a problem. Is that because they don't have enough food or they don't eat the right kinds of food?
So malnutrition is probably mainly due to they just have very poor agricultural practices. So they're subsistence farmers, so you'd think that after 1,000 years they would be really good at growing what grows in that area. But it's a culture that's extremely devastated by dependency. So you've got all these aid organizations that pour millions of dollars into Karamoja, and so there's really no motivation to develop or improve because then the aid would stop. And so while they do, they know how to grow things, corn and maize, they do not have a really balanced diet either. And so most of the time it's lots of carbohydrates or lots of alcohol.